Hi there! We have reached now to the last lab of RIP. In this lab, I'm going to show you how you can insert a route inside the RIP. And also I'm going to show you how you can configure neighbor RIP manually and why we need to configure them. Okay? We have still RIP configured on the three routers. Okay? But what I'm going to do now, I have this network, which is 3.3.3.0, I'm going to take it out from RIP. Okay? I don't want it to be advertised in RIP, so I'm going to go to R3 and take it out from the advertised network. And then I will make configuration on router 3 to insert inside RIP the connected network. In this case, this network is connected. So I'm asking now on the configuration, I'm asking the router 3 to insert this connected route inside RIP. That means that router 3 will advertise it again to router 2, and router 2 will advertise it to router 1, and then in this case router 1 and router 2 can reach to that network. That's something you can do. Also, you can redistribute actually connected route, you can redistribute static route, you can redistribute OSPF or BGP inside another network. Okay, so in this case I'm gonna do it on connected network to RIP. That's first part of the lab. The second part of the lab, what I'm gonna do now also, sometimes we said that RIP works, RIP version 1 send routing updates by broadcast, and RIP version 2 send routing updates by multicast. But let's say in between router 2 and router 3 we have a network like frame relay. Okay, frame relay normally doesn't send or receive broadcast or multicast. Okay, but we really need to do a RIP configuration here, but yeah, it will not work because updates will not be neither sent or received. So what we can do in this case, what we can do is we can manually configure router 2 to say that my neighbor is router 3. Okay, that is my neighbor, and router 3 also we will configure router 3 to say that my neighbor is router 2, my neighbor in RIP, of course. Huh? So in this case, the updates will be sent forward and backward by unicast. Okay, in this case, RIP will function well, and we have no problem that this update also will be sent here. But in this case here will be sent multicast, because between these two interfaces we are not going to do any change. Okay, so when we need to use the neighbor on RIP is when we have no possibility for multicast, or when multicast doesn't function well. Also, we can just make neighbor and then everything will be okay. Alright, so this is really what I need to do in this lab. Let's go now directly and see the steps that we have to follow. So let's start with step number 1. Remove 3.3.3.0/24 from the advertised network in RIP. Then we have to go to router 3, because 3.3.3.0, as you can see here on the graph, is connected to router 3. From router 3 I have to go to routing and then to RIP and then networks, and I will remove this. Alright, that's how you remove the advertised network. In this case, router 3, it's not anymore going to send in its routing update this network. So this step is done. Now, router 1 and router 2 now, they cannot reach, or after the timeout is finished, they cannot reach anymore 3.3.3.0 network. Then we have to find a solution by redistributing. Okay, we have to redistribute this network inside RIP as a connected network. Again, because 3.3.3.3 or 3.3.3.0 network is connected directly to router 3, then in this case, we have to redistribute the connected network. Okay, before I do that, let me just check now if router 1 now can see still 3.3.3.3. You can see he has set again the metric to 16, and in 1 minute or so he will remove it completely. Alright, what I want to do now, I will wait for 1 minute till it is removed completely, and then I will do the step 2, which is to insert or to redistribute it inside the network. Let's wait a minute. As you can see now, we have waited for 1 minute and we see 3.3.3.0, the network is not shown anymore to router 1. Okay, let's now do the step number 2 that they have asked us to. Let me go to router 3. I see it disconnected. Let me reconnect again. Okay. Then we have to go again to routing RIP. And from here, I go to interfaces. You have here RIP settings, okay? I'll go to RIP settings here, and this is what we need to do. Distribute default, here it's never. Well, I will change it and say, well, if installed, if the network which I want to distribute is installed in my routing table, then redistribute it. And here they gave me options, static router redistributed or redistribute connected or OSPF or BGP. In my case, 3.3.3.0 is a connected route, then I will redistribute this one. But before I do that, let me just show you when I go to IP route here, you can see that 3.3.3.0 is dynamic active connected route. Okay, you can see dynamic active connected route. All right, then if installed, it is installed in my routing table, I will redistribute it, apply and OK. All right, let's see now. This step is also done. Does R1 and R2 see 3.3.3.0/24 network in their routing table? Let's justify. This is router 1 now, and you can see directly, you see it. You can see it inside the routing table of RIP actually. 3.3.3.3 is seen here. Let me go to router 2 and also justify. I justify here, I go to routing RIP, and again you can see it also learned by RIP. Alright, so the answer here, yes, they can see it. Alright, if you want what we can do also, before I go to point number 4, what I can do is I can go from here to the terminal, and I can try to ping it, and you can see I have reply. I can try to ping it from source address of 1.1.1.1 and also have a reply. That's no problem at all. Let's see now what we have to do in the upcoming points. They ask us here to disable 192.168.23.0 on the RIP network for both R2 and R3. Alright, so what I'm gonna do now is just to show you here. We know that we have 192.168.23.0 here, okay, which is advertised on this router and which is advertised on this router. What I'm gonna do now, I will not advertise them, so I will take out the advertisement of 192.168.23.0, and then what I need to do a neighbor, like we said, between this interface and this interface on the RIP. Okay, before I do this neighborship, when I disable this route, then router 1 will not anymore know about it. Alright, he will not see it anymore because it's not anymore inside RIP. And then when I make the neighbor here between this interface and this interface, I make it manually. Okay, RIP neighbor manually. What I will do, I will re-enable again here, or re-advertise again here, the 192.168.23.0 on both routers. In this case, if the neighbor is working very well, if the neighbor here is working correctly, then they will send unicast to each other, and then router 1 will know again about the network 23.0. Okay, so this is really what I want to do now. So let's go and to router 2 first, and let me go to routing and RIP, and from here I will go to network, and I will say to the network 23.0, let me disable it, do not write it again. I will just disable it here, and I will do the same on router 3. I will go to routing, RIP, to the network 23.0, and I will disable it. Alright, so this is what we need to do now. Let's check this one also. So this is done. Now, configure neighbor RIP between router 2 and router 3. Okay, I'll go to router 2 now, and then to neighbor. Okay, so routing RIP neighbor, and now I'm gonna say here inside RIP, router 2 is saying that my neighbor is 192.168.23.3, which is the IP address of the interface Ethernet 2 of router 3. Look at the graph and you can recognize. So here what we are trying to do, we are trying to form a neighbor between router 2 and router 3 for RIP, because as we said, in case between those two routers, there is a frame relay network, for example, they cannot send to each other anymore broadcast or multicast, depending on what version we are using, then in this case RIP will not work. So what we are going to do, we are going to make neighbor between the two routers in a way that when they want to send update, it will be sent unicast, and then the RIP will work, and then it will be advertised to other routers in the network. So router 2 is saying my RIP neighbor now is 192.168.23.3. That's fine. And then on router 3, also I would say, for router 3 is saying my neighbor is 192.168.23.2. Alright? So this is how you can create neighbors. Okay, so this is done. Now re-enable 192.168.23.0/24 on router 2 and on router 3. Before I do that, let me go first to router 1 and see if I can still see this routing, because we have taken it out from the advertisement in RIP. It should not shown anymore for us. If I go to routing and RIP, route, you can see 192.168.23.0 is not there anymore. Because remember, we have taken out this network from the RIP process. So router 2 doesn't advertise it, and router 3 as well. Okay, but for router 1, the most important is router 2 because it gets the update from router 2. So he doesn't see it anymore. He waited for the timeout, no updates, then he took it out from the routing table. But now what we have done is, again, we made a neighbor between router 2 and router 3. Okay, that means that two interfaces are like neighbors. I'm gonna now enable again 192.168.23.0. I will advertise it as again in RIP, and if the neighbor is working correctly, then in this case router 1 will receive the updates. You can see here he has received the update for 3.3.3.0. That means again the neighbor is working without any problem. But let's try it now. I'll go to here to router 2, and then I will enable this one, and then I will go to router 3 and I will enable it. Okay, so this is fine, and we are going to make a ping in a moment. But before I do the ping, let me show you now what I want to do, one more step. Okay, we have made neighbor, we said here, RIP neighbor here, RIP neighbor, and on this interface and on this interface. Okay, the best to do is to normally we should have taken out this network. Why? Because if the RIP neighbor is working correctly and this was out, then when we enable it again, in this case router 3 will update router 2 about it, then router 2 can see it again if this is working again correctly, and then this one of course will update router 1. Alright, that's what we should have done, but it's okay, we can do it now very fast. I'll go to router 3, and from here what I can do is actually we have here we have made it a redistribute, so I will not redistribute 3.3.3.3 or 0. Alright, so I will not redistribute it. We see now on router in a moment, yeah, you see router 1, he put it directly 16. He doesn't see it anymore because we stopped the redistribution. And now, if I go again to router 3, and I will say I want to redistribute it now. Let me do it like this, just to see. Okay, so now it's a 16 on router 1. Okay, but if I go to routing and then RIP, and from here RIP settings, and I say I want, if installed, to redistribute the connected network, which is 3.3.3.0, and okay, then look at here directly now. In a moment we shall see again this is updated. You can see here it's directly updated. That means that if 3.3.3.3, if we go here again to the graph, if this one is able to reach router 1, this network, by an update, that means logically that the neighbor which we have formed over here is working properly. Okay, that's what I wanted to show you. Now, the last point they ask us is to make a ping between router 1 and 3.3.3.3. I will check it because I'm sure it will work. So I will go from here and then ping 3.3.3.3 source address 1.1.1.1, and here we go. You can see the ping is working perfectly without any problem. So this is how we can insert or redistribute a connected network, or also if you have a static network, you can also make the same way to insert in the side RIP or to redistribute it. And also this is how you can create neighbor between two RIP routers. Alright, this is the last lab in RIP. I hope you enjoyed it and you could understood RIP very well.